The year was 1996. President Bill Clinton was running for re-election. 2 years earlier, Republicans had taken over the House of Representatives for the first time in over 40 years. So Democrats were focused on every single House seat they could possibly win back. One seat they had their eye on was in Southern California. Here was their candidate for that seat, speaking at the 1996 Democratic Convention. See if he looks familiar.
It's a great honor to be here tonight, and I'm proud to be carrying the Clinton-Gore banner for San Diego's 49th Congressional District. Make no mistake, there are big differences between we Democrats and our opponents. And together with President Clinton, we will protect Medicare and Social Security and a woman's right to choose. And we will bring hope and pride and community and opportunity and responsibility to our future. Thank you very much. Good luck.
He was proud to be carrying the Clinton-Gore banner. In fact, First Lady Hillary Clinton personally came to San Diego to campaign for him. Still not recognizing him? Well, he was younger then, weren't we all? And goodness, how times change. He did not win that 1996 congressional race. In fact, he didn't win any of the 5 races he ran in the 1990s for various San Diego political offices, all of them as a liberal. That gentleman's name was Peter Navarro, the very same Peter Navarro who 20 years later would become a top official in Donald Trump's White House, the very same Peter Navarro who was arrested today on contempt of Congress charges, the very same Peter Navarro who is risking being sent to prison in order to protect one Donald J. Trump. It's a wild ride, right? How does this happen? This is a guy who once wrote, and I quote, "I don't know why so many people in America hate Hillary Clinton. I found her to be one of the most gracious, intelligent, perceptive, and yes, classy women I've ever met." How did he end up in Donald Trump's White House? Well, like so many unfortunate episodes, it starts with Jared Kushner. You see, Peter Navarro's day job was as an economist, and after his many failed Democratic political campaigns, he made something of a name for himself as an increasingly hysterical, unhinged even, China hawk. He published titles like Death by China, Confronting the Dragon, and The Coming China Wars. And during the 2016 campaign, when Trump wanted to look tough on China, he asked his son-in-law to find him an economist. Jared Kushner literally went on Amazon. Yeah, he went on Amazon, saw a book title, Death by China, and thought, sounds good to me. Jared then cold called Navarro, and hey presto, Peter Navarro became Trump's first and at that point only economic advisor. The new spotlight on Navarro's scholarly work, shall we call it, was not entirely positive. The Chronicle of Higher Education went through his books and discovered that Peter Navarro had invented an imaginary friend. He repeatedly quoted a source named Ron Vara, who he described as a military veteran and Harvard-trained economist who made 7 figures in the stock market by investing in companies that do well during international crises. Ron Vara doled out little scraps of wisdom like, you'd have to be nuts to eat Chinese food, and only the Chinese can turn a leather sofa into an acid bath, a baby crib into a lethal weapon, and a cell phone battery into heart-piercing shrapnel. But Ron Vara, wisest of wise men, did not exist. He is, in fact, just an anagram of Navarro's name. Navarro Ron Vara. Okay, then. Once in the Trump administration, Navarro launched a trade war with China, which devastated American farmers. Then he helped lead Trump's botched coronavirus response. But after the 2020 election, he found a new project. He and former Trump advisor Steve Bannon began working on a plan to overturn the election results and keep Donald Trump in office. And this is not hypothesis or speculation or conjecture. This is not like something we've had to piece together from leaked documents and secret emails. We know Peter Navarro did this because he has repeatedly told us all about it himself. First, he published a book about it, describing the plan to force a delay in the certification of Joe Biden's win and to pressure Republican legislatures in swing states to undo Biden's victories. And then he repeatedly went on our colleague Ari Melber's show to describe and even brag about the plan in detail, a plan he called the Green Bay Sweep. Naturally, the January 6th investigation in Congress was very interested in what he had to say, so they subpoenaed Navarro for testimony. When he defied the subpoena, the House voted to refer him to the Justice Department for prosecution for contempt of Congress. And that was where things stood last night when Peter Navarro went back on Ari's show again.
So you're risking going potentially to jail, not to talk to them, but you're out here talking in public. You do realize these investigators can hear you when you talk on TV.
This committee, this kangaroo committee, has clearly violated the separation of powers. They're not supposed to act as judge, jury, and executioner. They're only supposed to pursue a legislative function.
But you talked about the Green Bay sweep.
Let me give you a hypothetical.
But you talked about the Green Bay sweep. Why can't you talk to them about it if you talk about it in public?
You do realize they can hear you, right? But what we now know is that when Peter Navarro appeared on Ari's show last night, he had already been indicted by the Justice Department just hours earlier on contempt of Congress charges. Because for all the talking Peter Navarro is happy to do about his efforts to overturn the election, he has refused to talk to the January 6th investigation in Congress. And a subpoena from Congress is not a suggestion. If you defy it, you are breaking the law. Peter Navarro was arrested this morning at a Washington airport as he was boarding a plane for Nashville. At his initial hearing today, he was outraged that federal agents intercepted him at the airport and put him in handcuffs instead of just calling him and inviting him down to the courthouse for a friendly chat. How dare they treat him like this, he said, when as a Trump White House official, quote, I literally helped save millions of people's lives, created hundreds of thousands of jobs. Yeah, that's a direct quote. He really said that. He also spent a lot of time trying to convince the judge that the entire January 6th investigation is unconstitutional, while the judge practically begged Navarro for his own sake to keep quiet and get himself a lawyer. Navarro, the economist, is insisting on representing himself. In a lawsuit that Navarro has filed on his own against the investigation, he writes, quote, while I'm not a lawyer, I'm not without legal expertise. There's a line for the ages. Shockingly, a judge has already told him his lawsuit makes no sense and he needs to refile it. Navarro's outrage at his treatment is, of course, shared by many Republicans. I particularly appreciated Congressman Louis Gohmert's take on this situation.
We have a two-tiered justice system. If you're a Republican, you can't even lie to Congress or lie to an FBI agent, or they're coming after you.
I remember the days when a good old-fashioned red-blooded American could lie to Congress or the FBI with impunity. What has become of this country? To be clear, Peter Navarro is not charged with lying to Congress. He's charged with defying a congressional subpoena, though I can understand why Louis Gohmert would be confused, given how many other Trump officials have been charged with lying to Congress and to the FBI. But look, whether Peter Navarro is going to be convicted on these contempt charges, whether he is potentially going to face a year or two in prison for refusing to talk to January 6th investigators, that's obviously of great importance to Mr. Navarro. But for the rest of us, the question is whether the Justice Department indicting a top Trump White House official tells us anything broader about the department's investigation into January the 6th. Is this just the DOJ finally getting around to charging Peter Navarro for his contempt? Or is this one moving piece in a much bigger picture? Who better to ask than Barbara McQuade, former U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Michigan and now a professor at the University of Michigan Law School. She's also an MSNBC legal analyst. Barb, thanks again for joining us tonight. I want to get your reaction first to the drama from today. Peter Navarro says the Justice Department was being aggressive and punitive by arresting him at the airport instead of allowing him to turn himself in. But prosecutors apparently asked for the indictment to be sealed at first because they feared he was a flight risk if he knew they were coming. What do you make of how this all went down today?
Well, he has already shown himself to be someone who does not comply with subpoenas and court orders. So the idea that if they were to ask him politely to please show up to turn himself in, you would be reasonable to think that he might not comply when you asked him to do that. So most people don't get the courtesy of an invitation to come in on their own. Most people get arrested. And because he didn't have a lawyer, it made it also a little more difficult to negotiate a self-surrender. So I think he was treated the way most criminals are treated when they are charged with a crime, alleged criminals, people who are charged with crimes. And as you point out, the Justice Department, the U.S. Attorney's Office, filed a motion with the judge specifically explaining why they believed that he was either a risk of flight or a risk to tamper with evidence or witnesses, and for that reason asked for the order to be sealed so that they could conduct the arrest and bring him to court and unseal it right after that.
I love how all these Republicans have suddenly become criminal justice and prison reformers once all these Trump people start getting arrested and put in jail. Yeah. Earlier this week, Bob, the Justice Department served Navarro with a grand jury subpoena, and there was speculation about whether that was just related to the contempt case against him or whether Navarro was being subpoenaed as a witness in a broader investigation into Trump himself. Does this indictment today shed any light on that question?
I don't know if it does, Mehdi, but I do think the two are related. You'll note that he also complained about the service of that subpoena because the FBI knocked very loudly on his door when they came to serve him with that subpoena.
How dare they?
But I did notice that it had requested that he come to the grand jury and testify about the same matters that he was asked to testify about in Congress and to bring documents with him. So it is unclear whether they were simply investigating the contempt or if they were investigating the underlying conduct that is the subject of his testimony in Congress. Not clear there. But what is clear is he defied that subpoena. He attached it to his own lawsuit that he filed earlier this week and outed himself as a recipient of a grand jury subpoena. And the date that he was supposed to appear to testify or bring documents to the grand jury was yesterday at 9 a.m. Later that day, he was indicted. So I think that at some point, the Justice Department has been trying to work with him, get him to cooperate, see if he's willing to come in, and finally concluded it's not happening. It's time to treat him as a defendant and not a witness.
So, Bob, last question. The New York Times is reporting tonight that even as Navarro has been charged, the Justice Department has decided not to indict Trump's White House Chief of Staff, Mark Meadows, and White House aide Dan Scavino, who were also held in contempt of Congress and had their cases referred to the Justice Department. The Times suggests this might be because Meadows and Scavino negotiated with the January 6th investigation, turned over some documents. Is there a meaningful difference? And do you understand why a lot of people watching at home will say, oh, my word, what is the Garland Justice Department doing?
Yeah, I don't know all the facts yet about this, but based on what I read in their statement, it sounds like they just assess the equities of the two cases to be very different and the facts and circumstances of the two cases to be very different. Meadows was the chief of staff. Scavino was deputy chief of staff. They are the president's closest advisors. So any claim of executive privilege is a little stronger there. Now, even if that executive privilege claim ultimately fails, as the Supreme Court has held with regard to documents for the National Archives, what you have to prove in one of these cases of contempt is willful violation. That is, not only did they fail to comply, but they knew that what they were doing was illegal. And I suppose the argument could be giving them the great benefit of the doubt that because they thought they were negotiating in good faith, because they did turn over many things, because they did believe they had at least some residual executive privilege, it would be difficult to prove to a unanimous jury beyond a reasonable doubt that they willfully defied the subpoena. So I agree that that is a little bit unsatisfying, but I don't know that we're done, hearing the story of Mark Meadows and Dan Scavino yet. I think there's still a possibility that they could be charged in the larger conspiracy to obstruct the election certification.
Let us see what happens. Barbara McQuade, we'll have to leave it there, former U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Michigan and MSNBC legal analyst. Thank you for your time tonight.
Thanks, Mehdi.